Hello everyone and welcome. I am here with Alex and Frank, two of the developers for Star Wars X-Wing, classic guests here. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Good to be back.
Yeah, that's right. So we're here at FFG Worlds 2017, the first Star Wars Worlds, and we're about to have another X-Wing World Championship just 6 months after Nand destroyed people with his, it was a Dingaroo, was that right?
Yes, Dengar Manaroo. And that archetype seems to be, in such a short amount of time, more or less gone from the meta. It just goes to show you how quickly things can change.
That's right. So we've had some releases. We've had an FAQ, I believe, that changed Manaroo up and Palpatine and that whole thing. So let's just talk about where X-Wing is. So we're World Championship. The Open Series kind of just finished up. We had a lot of big tournaments to watch. I know Paul Heaver, the legend, won an Open Series. Then someone won the next Open Series with his list, with Miranda and Biggs and blah.
And then you almost won the entire system Open.
I did! I was so close. Yes, I got second.
The dark horse candidate.
That's right, just sliding right in there. So what's your take on where X-Wing is now?
That's a good question. I think it's in a really interesting place. I think we're kind of in the heyday of the Scum faction. I think that the Wave 8 and Wave 9 releases for Scum were very strong. And
mission accomplished.
Yeah.
I remember for those waves you're talking about finding a way to get Scum on the table.
Right, yeah. And so, whenever you're trying to push the envelope a little bit, you can end up going a little bit too far at times. And I think certainly the Jumpmaster 5000 expansion pack and to a lesser extent some of the stuff in Wave 9 turned out to be a really, really strong release for the Scum. And paired with Tani Mindlink, I think what we have is a really flexible, powerful couple of lists with a lot of different elements. You've got a little bit of control. You've got some damage mitigation in there with Latz Razi. You've got
just the action efficiency.
Yeah, action efficiency. You got a sledgehammer in Fen Rao. So they have a lot of tools, and the really good players are able to use those tools very, very effectively. So I think we've got we're kind of in the golden hour for Scum, or maybe the depths of the darkness if you're not a Scum player, perhaps. But I think that there's still some strong Rebel and Imperial builds that can give those lists a run for their money as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
And so with the latest FAQ, I know we had Palpatine, but slightly less good. Not too bad, but slightly. You had the Manaroo change.
Yep.
You had what was the other really important change?
X7 TIE Defenders.
Yeah, the Defender. So that was kind of the Defender title and Mindlink to me were very similar in that they were hard to control. You can't really stop the token from happening. You can't really do anything about it. So do you think after that FAQ, are there any other things that you may be looking at to kind of adjust? I feel like it's in a pretty good spot across the board with that tweaking of all of the things. Maybe Imperial took a little more of a step down, or the other ones took a half step up. But is there anything else you're looking at post that FAQ at this point? Or are you waiting for the Worlds results to massage the meta?
Well, we like to wait to see what happens at Worlds because it's such a great crucible for what is actually out there in the meta. You see the best players in the world. You see multiple days of X-Wing. You see, oftentimes you'll see expectations subverted. Last year, or the 6 months ago in the Worlds, we had a lot of expectation that X7 Defenders or Palpatine would be on the top. So it was interesting to see the final be Corran Horn versus Dengaroo. I don't think that is something people would necessarily have predicted. So we're usually surprised at least a little bit by what's out there, and we usually pay pretty close attention to that to determine what, if anything, should be done to kind of tweak the meta a little bit. Definitely going into Worlds, we're looking at a Tani Mindlink. We're looking at how strong that is. We're looking at, as always, regen is extremely powerful. Auto damage is really powerful. People have finally figured out that bombs are great.
You guys made them great.
Well, Sabine helps. Sabine does
auto damage, right?
It's true. Yeah, auto damage is scary. It's a very strong mechanic. So it's one of those things that you always have to keep an eye on. So I think we have certainly got a list of things that we're looking out for, but I expect the unexpected.
Excellent.
Yeah, we don't want to be too knee-jerk in our response if we see something dominating too well, because sometimes the meta will just correct itself. We don't have to add cards. It'll just adjust as people have figured a new playstyle, a new way around it. So the most recent group of errata was some time in the making. We didn't, it wasn't just like we decided the week before, hey, let's just do all these things, So we want the meta to settle a bit. You can't jostle around too much as new waves come out. It adjusts the meta. You don't want it to smack it around too much. It'll shift on its own to some level. But
sure.
Obviously we're waiting for Worlds as a avenue to find out.
An indicator.
Yeah.
How I was gonna say, how much are you paying attention to those results? Because I know, so you have Dingaroo that won. But at the same time, Palp Defenders was around, and it was because it makes up a lot of the top 16, right? But how much does Worlds results really factor in to your guys' analysis of the meta and like what you're looking to potentially adjust?
I'd say it's more, we don't want to make it's a big time as far as people are planning for it. So you don't want to make too many big shifts right beforehand, because all these people have been running these lists, winning events with them. So you don't want it to pull the rug out from under them. This is how they got here, and then you're like, can't do that now.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So a lot of it is reacting to, we don't want to throw people under the bus by removing the thing that made them make it work for them.
This whole season, effectively.
Exactly.
So we do, speaking of new things coming out, which I mentioned a minute ago, we have the C-ROC for Scum. Scum's epic ship, finally.
Yep.
We also have Wave 11 coming out. Things like Imperial getting a turret, which is both terrifying and exciting as a Imperial loyalist, kind of, sometimes. So, loyalist. I was just doing research with the rebellion.
Reconnaissance.
Yes.
Deep cover.
Yes, that's right. I was a spy. Learning.
Sabine.
Sure. Anyway, so Wave 11, what do you think is... What are you introducing in this wave that may shake it up or add new elements? Because we have Worlds, which is going to give you a lot of information, but then post that, I think pretty quickly we're going to get a new wave, which will be exciting.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that? Any cards in particular you're looking to spice things up?
Well, I think you hit on one major component, and the Imperials have never had a ship with a turret slot before, and we've seen how very, very effective Y-Wings are for the Rebellion.
Sure.
The TIE Aggressor is, and for Scum, yep. The TIE Aggressor is a slightly different beast, but it has a lot of the same core elements. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to slap a twin laser turret on it and see how that works. Works well,
Throw
obviously.
a bunch of them. Yeah. Weird.
So,
2-3 dice shots are good.
But it's not an element that the Imperials have ever had access to before. So I think that's going to change list building a lot. You have suddenly got the ability to add some fire support to your to your swarm or to your aces, or there's a lot of different avenues that opens up in terms of design.
Sure.
So that'll be an interesting time for Imperial players. I think the Scum finally get a heavy bomber, and some interesting cards to help that archetype along. I mean, it doesn't have advanced slam, so it's a different beast from the K-Wing, but it's still got a lot of cool tricks up its sleeve. Look out for Cad Bane and Bomblet Generator and some cool stuff in that pack. I'll shake things up a little bit.
You say Cad Bane. You willing to say what he does? I'm excited about Cad.
So sure, why don't we spoil Cad a little bit? Cad is the, some might say, the Scum version of Sabine Wren. He interacts with bombs that roll dice. A lot of people have steered away from things like proximity mines and cluster bombs in the past because they can miss, and Sabine corrects that issue, and Cad Bane does as well. Cad Bane lets you reroll dice when you drop a bomb, like a proximity mine or a cluster bomb.
That's really, those clusters can be painful.
Oh yeah, and Cad Bane just there to add a little bit of insurance to that, and so I think we may see some scum bombs. I think people will dust off the Andrasta and Iman Azamine, have some fun with that. I know I've had a lot of fun with that in playtesting.
Yep. That's awesome.
We can talk Bomblet Generator a little bit too. Bomblet Generator is infinite bombs! Just bombs.
Just keeps making bombs.
Bombs and bombs.
And is that Scum or is that
That is, I don't believe it is. Is it Scum exclusive? No, it's just a double bomb slot.
As well.
It's unique and it's double bomb slot. It's a bit of experimental technology. So yeah, you can put that in a K-Wing. You can put that on a fire spray with the
Wow.
Andrasta title.
And you just keep
It's
bombing.
got some applications. Yeah, it's essentially a seismic charge-ish effect all the time.
Because those bombs feel a little safer as far as like the repeatability of
Sure.
it, and it's easier to avoid. Unlike the drop it right on your face, it goes off instantly type
Yeah.
of bombs. So
Yeah, well, that's cool.
So that should be
get a turret.
interesting.
Yeah, I also know one of the concepts from the spoiler I could see is one of the ships that was Scum had a rebel pilot. So what's going on there?
Well, I think what we came across was we came across a character who fit really quite well in both worlds. The character of Captain Nim in the EU was a pirate. He ran a gang called the Loch Revenants, and he eventually, more or less, joins the rebellion.
More or less.
He always sort of pretends that he's got his independence. He's a little bit of a Han Solo character in that
I'm
respect,
independent,
like,
kinda.
but you know, in reality, at least in the EU material, he was basically working hand in hand with the rebellion at a certain point. So what we realized was we're probably not going to do another Skurg at any point. Like, this is the Skurg product.
This is it.
And it felt strange for it to be a Rebel product a little bit because it's mostly associated with pirates and with fringers, scum, and villainy type characters. But one of the most renowned and notable characters that flew the ship works very well in the Rebel Alliance. So we thought, well, why not just throw a Rebel version in there and give
harm there,
the
right?
Rebels
Add a card.
give the Rebels some,
Which is cool, because I
some
think
fun.
there may be a lot of players that buy just a single faction, but I have a sense that most people are buying most things to get all the upgrades and all the pilots and have all the options and whatnot. So it makes sense. Like, it's the same thing with if early on in the TIE Fighter you had Sabine's TIE packed in that, that would have been great, right? You have a single TIE Fighter that can be flown with the Rebellion the whole time. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think that we can continue to do that kind of thing when the opportunity arises. It's not something we're going to, plan to do, but if a situation comes up where it makes sense and we have
From like a theme
space
perspective.
on the punch board, why not, right?
Throw it in. Very cool. So one thing I'd be curious to know about, as you guys have been around for a while, what wave did you guys come in on for X-Wing as developers?
The first thing I did was I was right at Imperial Aces, was like wrapping up.
So is that like wave 4-ish?
It's like 3.5, I think is internal naming. But that was sort of my first project, and the Rebel Transport was kind of making its different final iterations as well. So that was when I joined, but that was just barely before.
You were a little bit before Alex. I know you brag about that.
It's true.
And Alex just can't ever get over it. So effectively, you were handed a system with a basis of ships that are happening. And I know a concept I talk about on a lot of our content is this idea that, like, wave 1 comes out, and then in wave 2 we get turrets, and those are really good on the Falcon. And then eventually we get auto thrusters and things that make turrets less good, and then it kind of feels like offense gets better, defense gets more consistent, offense gets more and back and forth. And then at some point it's like, well, now those early ships, a lot of them, like the TIE Fighter, are not they're consistent, but 2 dice is not enough to like get through most targets ever, no matter how many times you throw 2 dice at someone. So what's it like at this point? You're working on wave 11. Wave 11's coming out, so I assume you're done working on that by about a long time ago. But as you're looking ahead and working on future X-Wing things, I have to imagine even something like giving Imperials a turret is a little nerve-wracking because you've kind of built this structure of X-Wing, and to me it seems like there's so many things you have to honor that adding new elements to the game that are interesting. I also feel like there's the lines between what is good enough but not too good are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And so designing to be within that mark while also offering something interesting and new to players and factions seems very difficult. So what are the challenges you're facing at this point, and what's your mindset going into the future of X-Wing at this point?
That's a very good question. You're right, it is really challenging. The more ships come out, the more upgrades come out, the more the cream rises to the top, and we see what is powerful and what isn't powerful. The harder it becomes to create new content within that structure, because you want to do 2 things, right? You want to make something new and exciting and that people are going to be interested in, and it's going to change the way the game plays. So you get stuff like the mobile firing arc and you know, the Protectorate Starfighter, which wants to do some crazy chicken maneuver, and you get all of these different elements that we've added to the game. But at the same time, you don't want to necessarily every single time create the new hotness. You know, the ships in Wave 11 shouldn't be substantially better than all other ships, or you know, you just get into this.
It's power creep.
Yeah, power creep cycle. But a little bit of that is sort of inevitable. I mean, we miss the mark sometimes. Unanticipated things rise to the top that we didn't predict would be as strong as they are, or people figure something out. I mean, I think Atani Mindlink is a good example. When we were testing that, it seemed like the stress element of it was a reasonable limiter. And when that card first came out, a lot of people dismissed it because of the downside.
And at the time, stress was a much bigger part of the game.
Right, and at the time there was more stress involved, and there was a lot of, like, you know, stress. The BTLA4 Y-wing with stress astromech. There's a lot of stuff that was keeping that under control, and the ships available were not all that useful.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, besides the Jumpmaster itself, there weren't a lot of other places to put it on. There's like the C-ROCs, and M3A.
So at the time, and that's kind of the thing, right? Whereas you put more things out.
Yeah, eventually there'll be a better
cards
platform.
Are like,
Shadowcaster comes out, Protectorate Starfighter comes out, and all of a sudden Mindlink is out of control.
Yeah.
And it's sort of interesting to see that kind of thing happen, and it's difficult to control, and we don't want a laundry list of errata that's 13 pages long. So we have to be really careful in terms of how we address that kind of thing. Fortunately, I think the game itself is dynamic enough and players are interesting enough in what they build and what they bring to the table that the meta seems to continue to be in flux. I think that's one of the saving graces of a larger card pool is what's on top today may not be on top 6 months from now, and it may not have anything to do with errata or with you know, anything that we specifically do directly to address what is perceived as a problem. Sometimes it's just like new opportunities come in and people figure something out, or something that's been dormant rises back to the top. So I think that sort of cycle of like, okay, what's cool now? What's winning? What can I do? Gets really interesting because I think it's a constantly evolving process, and hopefully it'll stay that way without ever sort of stagnating into specifically dominant archetypes. And if it ever does, I think that's the time that we get together and we talk very seriously about what sort of small tweaks we can do to change or prevent that.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. So speak briefly about the way our card games work. Sometimes when the card pool gets really large, like with Call of Cthulhu and Game of Thrones First Edition, you have this state where there's a certain meta deck that's getting a certain direction, and then like someone's like, hey, remember that thing from like 3 years ago that was popular, and this new card came out, and then suddenly we have to worry about that again.
Yeah.
And then everyone's like, wait, what did we do to fix that last time around? And like that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, that's happening in X-Wing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, you know, suddenly Dash is back, and it's like, what do we do about
how did we beat this again?
How do we beat Dash? And then, you know, oh, Phantoms, or like whatever. It's just the game has enough opportunities that one card might interact with an old popular standby, and it's suddenly back on top again. That's one advantage of having such a large card pool.
I was going to say, that's one of the benefits of such a structure, is that you do have a lot. But you also have the situations, and this gets to more of a foundational question, which I'd love to get your thoughts on. So when I first started playing X-Wing, it was Wave 1, right? Which is TIE Fighters, TIE Advance, Y-Wing, X-Wing. It's a very different game than we have today.
Oh, yes.
In a lot of ways. But then in Wave 2, I remember I was so angsty about the Falcon. Like I did not like the turret. So
it's a controversial mechanic, even still.
Yeah, and I get the sense now, like the structures, I see it, because we've been talking a lot about like what makes a game the game. Like in Destiny, it's the action back and forth to us, and so on and so forth. But in X-Wing, I kind of visualize it now as like a triangle with jousting on one corner, arc dodging on another corner, which is what we got in the first wave. We had jousters, and we had people that could dodge those jousters, right? TIE Swarm or TIE Advanced, and so on and so forth. And then you introduce a third leg of that, which is like turrets. So you have jousters who can be dodged by arcs. Then the turrets spend more points to make sure you can't arc dodge them. but then are typically spending too many points to be efficient against jousters, like pure jousting. So the entice forms, anyways. And then in the middle, you threw in bombs. Like somewhere, they can just blow up 8 dodgers. They have enough health that they can actually work through the turrets. And then as far as jousting, it's like I'll joust you, and then as I'm flying by, I'm dropping bombs behind me so that you K-turn onto some damage. Is that logical? Is that the foundation of the game? Is that X-Wing, or is it was that always intended? Those elements?
I would say that I don't think during the initial design of the game that was so much like the scope of like we're gonna make this, rock paper scissors, like this is gonna happen. Like it was a natural kind of evolution of the system because a lot of the game was thematically designed because you're trying to be like this should feel like an X-Wing, this should feel like a TIE fighter, this should feel like the Falcon. The fact that the Falcon has a turret, it's able to shoot. You see that in that when they're leaving the Death Star, they're just popping ties right and left. There is an amount of like us just trying to simulate that system and trying to get the costs right so that it's obviously you don't get to a place that is so much health that it's like a jouster. It has a turret and can also dodge arcs, which we got close to with Dash Rendar because of the barrel rolls on large ships. Like it got a bit
close again with like the Jumpmaster.
Exactly.
That's kind of
With
the
the
trick
barrel-
with the barrel
barrel
roll
on
and the
large
one green turn on a large ship.
Yeah.
And a turret and a anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. So
And a can of bombs. And
right. So there is this amount of like we slowly became aware of like this phenomena where it was sort of I could say that it was sort of invented by players in a way. This natural
it was just the natural evolution of the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've become much more aware of that now as far as designing new ships going forward.
So just that foundation. So are you designing with that idea in mind? Where it's like
these days we're much more aware of that. So the idea of the TIE Aggressor having a turret, for example, is sort of the first time you'll get like a small turret in that faction. So it starts to play in other fields, and by just natural being a TIE fighter, it has somewhat of the arc dodgy aspect of the barrel. But
so I mean, if you had like the prototypical, if you did have a triangle, and you had like a pure jouster, and a pure dodger, and a pure bomber. It's like the TIE Aggressor, is somewhere on that chart in between the arc dodging and the bombing, the turreting.
Yes, you have that. If you have like a spectrum in the space between the things, right?
And all the ships kind of you could chart it out actually, which would be very cool to see like where all the different ships, and even different pilots could be more arc dodgy, like a Vader versus the lower pilot skill advanced, or like Soontir versus and so on. Yeah,
this was apparent after playing enough, like with the Interceptor with push limit, for example. That you have your low pilot skill Interceptor, you're like, oh, it's clearly an arc dodger. And you're like, is it though? Because it's not really making the decisions that Soontir Falcon make, because you have to just guess where you think things are going to be rather than being able to be reactionary and moving later.
It is a positional piece.
Yes.
But I think high pilot skill is required to be an arc dodger.
Yes.
Or higher than the opponent.
And so, I think just ultimately we've learned a lot about the game over the number of years that we've been developing it, and certain things were set down in waves 1 through 3. Certain things that we did in 4 and 5 that continue to influence things. But I think we've learned a lot. We've learned that pilot skill is not equally valuable across all platforms. A pilot skill increase on an Interceptor is hugely valuable. A pilot skill increase on a B-Wing. It's all right.
Too much,
it can be helpful, but it's not, nobody's reaching for Ibtisam or Tennam because of their amazing arc dodging capabilities, so they're probably overpaying for their pilot skill.
Sure.
Certain ships that are, jousters and they're sort of all-rounders are perhaps overpaying for early ideas of what makes a ship effective. Certain niche ships have recently become very strong and very popular because something about their playstyle has opened up either through a new upgrade card or just that people have realized, oh wow, Advanced Slam is actually amazing. Like, that's been around for a while. It's been around for years, and we're only now just sort of seeing how very strong that actually is. Regens, super strong, depending on the platform. So I think we've learned a lot about what makes an effective ship, and how it relates to other ships. But alongside that, we've also got years worth of content to account for every time we do something. So
every lesson is built in somewhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, not only does a ship have to stand up on its own merits, you also have to think about how it interacts with the faction. Like every ship we do for Rebels, well, what about Biggs? You know, like every
the Biggs question.
Yeah,
my favorite question.
So this is something that you're right when you talk about the sort of Frank likes to talk about accretion, which is just the constant addition of content that sort of, you know,
to me it feels
builds
like weight.
this.
It's like you have added weight to this whole system, and it's like eventually, how much weight can the structure of X-Wing take?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think it's still going strong. I think I'm looking forward to a really interesting, and I think it's going to be a pretty varied World Finals. But you know, you're right. Every new product that comes out, it makes it a little bit more challenging. It adds new opportunities. It adds depth to the game, but it also does, you know, add yet another strut, another buttress, another whatever, you know, gargoyle to the to the edifice, and it's gonna be really interesting to see, you know, as more and more waves come out, what sort of the overall effect on the game that has.
Well, and I think it's something you mentioned that's really fascinating to me, because I remember back in the early days of X-Wing, when you look, it very much in Wave 1 felt mathematical, where every pilot skill, every upgrade slot, every shield, every health had some kind of point value associated to it. And the lesson of like understanding pilot skill is worth more on an interceptor than it is on a TIE bomber or on any number of ships, right? Is pretty bizarre. Like when that's not intuitive until you get there, and then it's real.
Yeah, and there's no like you said, there's no tried and true formula for it. You know, like
it's not a math equation.
There's math involved. We certainly look at numbers. We certainly look at, you know, efficiency curves, and we math things out, like how likely is this attack to do damage, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, yeah, there's a lot of sort of undefinable things. The value of a dial. How do you weight that with a number? Like the pilot skill with variable valued pilot skill on certain ships.
Sure. Well, it's the sum of the parts. It's the other ships in the faction, it's the dial, it's the pilot ability. Like, as an example, PTL on Soontir on pilot skill 9 is far more useful than on the pilot skill 4 version. It's still good. Push the limit for 2 actions on an interceptor is great. But like, for Soontir in particular, that's a way better pilot skill.
Very true.
Yeah, and just having access to a slot that gets more valuable later, it's not like we could have necessarily anticipated that, oh, now that this has system and this and that and this, then, oh, it turns out, 3 waves later.
6 years later.
Yeah, that, oh, this specific combination is particularly bad. Of course, we do our best to try to make those combinations ourselves, and we're aware of, well, you have access to that and the other thing. But yeah, sometimes there's just, it's difficult to cost a card appropriately without it being too good on one ship and not useful anywhere else.
And I think too the timing, right? Which is if you have to make a ship that is not so good now, but also relevant in 5 years. Is quite a task. That's quite, especially when you've never designed the game before.
Right.
So last thing for me that I'd be curious to know and is looking back at essentially 11 waves of X-Wing at this point. Are there any cards that you either expected to be very good and that aren't, or that you think are better than people give it credit for? What cards should players watching take a second look at, right? Like, as an example, the K-Wing and Miranda were out for a while. I remember we unboxed that and it was like, that ability seems good. Like, there's some good stuff happening here. But I don't know, are there any pilots, any upgrades that you are either surprised people haven't picked up or you think people should be picking up at this point?
I think that's a really good question.
You're just rifling through all the upgrades in his head.
And then also which ones are real now, and
right, because we always have to remember like what's actually out there and what isn't.
Can we get the Jeopardy music? I
think recently a lot of hidden gems have been picked up. I think people are finally understanding how strong bombs can be, and I think that's been the last year or so that's really emerged. And I think Sabine Wren kicked that off because she's got a great ability, but I also just think that bombs were great and people didn't really know it. You don't necessarily need Sabine to win with bombs. She just helps a lot. She makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it just makes it consistent. But Miranda with bombs, even without Sabine,
still a force to be reckoned with.
Still a problem for aces.
Oh yeah,
like aces still have to Hope
It's
those
true.
rolls go their way.
It's true.
I remember even back when when we first started with Wave 4 and stuff, there were some use of bombers, like TIE bombers, that you'd use, and it always felt like as soon as you launched your proton bomb or seismic charge or whatever, that you were immediately defanged. Because it's this feeling like, oh, I can't go there because he might drop the bomb. Oh, I can't go there because he might drop the bomb. And then once it's dropped, then you're like, oh, now I'm safe. So there's this, So there's an element that you don't really notice the impact it's having because it's preventing them from doing a thing. So you don't see them do it. So it's hard to see the effect that it was having that you hadn't dropped it yet, essentially.
I talk about that concept a lot, actually.
Good.
Steven is probably tired of hearing about it. So bombs, you think, are the thing? I think the lightweight frame was a really big piece for a lot of the ships.
Yeah, lightweight frame. I think we might see that on some TIE SFs or on the upcoming Aggressor on some ships that haven't seen a ton of play. I think TIE Strikers with lightweight frame are pretty nasty.
So good.
They're very fragile, and I think that makes people nervous to play them, but you get a lot of bang for your buck, and I think we might see some striker lists in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially with like we said, the Aggressor coming out, I think is going to open up some possibilities because you can have strikers and aggressors in the same list. You can have the hard-hitting,
it's a lot of dice.
you can have the hard-hitting strike force, and you can also have someone sort of skirting the edge of the combat, just chipping in damage from downtown, like that TLT does. So we're going to see some. We might see some different Imperial lists than we're used to. But yeah, hidden gems. We'll see what Jeff Burling's playing this year. I'll just say that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you all for watching. If you aren't aware, we recently launched X-Wing subscriptions. You can sign up, automatically get all your ships without even trying. So thanks you guys again. We'll catch you guys on more X-Wing on some Worlds coverage. And until then, keep playing.